Okay, so today's video is on subtracting integers. So yesterday we just talked about general rule for subtracting of you can check by adding back and then talk about what happens when you subtract zero, subtract the number from itself. Now we're going to subtract where we have some positive numbers, some negative numbers. So the first thing we're actually going to do is look at two problems that are very similar to each other. We have 10 minus 4 and 10 plus negative 4. And we all know that 10 minus 4 is 6. And we know from when we did our addition problems that the rule when you had one positive and one negative was you take the sign of the bigger one, which would be 10, so the answer is going to be positive, and then you actually subtract these. So 10 minus 4 is 6. And so what you can see from these two is they're almost identical problems. They do have the same answer. And if you think of them, what happens on a number line, you would see actually the exact same thing happens in both these problems. I start out at negative 10 here, and then I'm subtracting 4, which means I'd have to go back 4 places, and I'd end up at 6. Well, on the bottom one, same thing. I start out at positive 10, but I'm adding a negative. And when I add a negative, that means I have to go to the left. So I go to the left 4 places, and yeah, I end up right at 6. You see, like on a number line, actually the exact same thing is happening. And so I get the same answer. I start with the same thing. The only difference is this right here. The problem on top was subtracting a positive 4. The problem on bottom was adding a negative 4. And from doing the addition problems, we see these are actually it's the exact same thing. And so what that tells us is when we're doing subtraction problems, we can actually just change them to an addition problem, right? If we just make an addition problem and then change the sign on that second number, then we have a problem we know how to do. So I could make this one 8 plus a positive 6. And I know how to do 8 plus 6. 8 plus 6 is just 14. And so I take a problem that's subtracting that we didn't know. I can make it into an addition problem that I know will have the same answer as long as I change this sign. And so it makes it much easier. It's an addition problem I already know how to do. And if you check this, like we were doing yesterday, you'll see I'd start with the answer I got, and I'd add on what had been subtracted, add on a negative 6. Well, when I add a positive and a negative, I take the sign of the bigger one, so it's positive, and I subtract them. 14 minus 6 is 8. So, yeah, it checks out. That is the right answer. It's definitely 14. Okay? And I did that just by changing it from a subtraction to an addition and changing the sign. Okay? So, you can think of it, if I have a subtraction problem, what I'm going to do is add its opposite. Or the other thing that we like to say is you can add a line and change the sign. So what I mean by that is you add a line through the subtraction, and now it's addition, and then change the sign of the number after it. So now 11 minus 3, negative 11 minus 3 became negative 11 plus negative 3. The confusing part is we have these subtraction problems and we're changing them. That's easy, but now you have to go back and remember all those different addition rules. So like this one, I'm adding up and they're both negatives. My answer will be negative. 11 plus 3 is 14. And again, check these. Always go back and do your check, right? The original problem was 11 minus 3. So if I do my answer plus 3, well, again, use those addition rules. They're different signs. I take the sign of the bigger, which is the 14, so it's negative, and I subtract these. It's 11. Yes, that is the right thing. So I know my negative 14 is the right answer. What gets everyone confused is you're doing all this addition, and sometimes when you're doing an addition problem, you actually end up having to subtract because they have different signs. They're working against each other. And that's where people get confused. They say, wait a minute, we had a subtraction problem. I changed it to an addition problem. But then sometimes when I have that addition problem, I end up having to subtract. Or when I go back and check, I'm actually subtracting. And so I'm going back and forth between all the subtraction and addition, and that gets confusing. And it does get confusing. So you just have to remember all your different rules. Okay? For subtraction, we have one simple rule. We add a line to make that addition, change the sign of the number after. Add a line, change the sign. Now I have my addition rules. If both of these were negative, my answer would be negative and I add them up. When one's negative and one's positive, I take the sign of the bigger one, in this case negative, and then I subtract them. 7 minus 6 is 1. Once I've changed this, it's now an addition problem. Forget that it ever even started as subtraction. Okay? Just do this with your adding rules. Take those rules out and use them if you need to, or make a number line, right? I'm starting down at negative 7. Okay, I'm starting way down here, and then I'm adding 6. So I'm coming back the other way 6 places. That is going to end up at negative 1. Okay, or check it. My answer plus what I was subtracting should, well, they're both negatives. My answer will be negative. I add them up, it's 7. Yeah, that's the right answer. It's a lot of rules to remember, but if you pull your notes out and have those rules sitting there, or write number lines and use the number lines going back and forth, once you change it to the addition problem, it should be easy. Okay, so pause the video and try these ones. You should actually change every one of these. The first thing I should see when I look at your notes is that you change this to negative 9 plus negative 9. Then figure that one out. Okay, so pause the video, do these, and I'll give you the answers. Okay, so if I'm doing a negative 9 plus a negative 9, that should give me negative 18. Okay, this one should get changed. Add a line, change the sign on the 20. 12 plus negative 20 should give you a negative 8. The 20 is bigger, so the answer is negative. Subtract them, I get 8. Okay, again, add a line, change the sign. Negative 4 plus positive 8. These are different. Take the sign of the bigger, it's positive. Subtract them, 4. That's your answer. Add a line, change the sign. 5 plus 14, well, that's easy. 5 plus 14 is 19. We knew how to do that for a long time. So again, make sure you write this rule down. This is the last thing in this video. Write this rule down. To do subtraction, we change it to adding the opposite. Or, if it's easier to remember, add a line, change the sign. Okay, get that written down. But what you need to remember is once it's changed, then you're using those addition rules. If they're both negatives, then it's going to be negative and you add. If one's negative and one's positive, you take the sign of the bigger and you subtract them. You got to use those rules. Obviously, if they're both positive, we already knew how to do that. But the other ones, you got to use those rules, or you got to draw the number lines out so that you can make sure you get them right. But you add a line, change a sign first, then follow your addition rules. And that's it for subtracting.